Is your security posture just compliance theater? I mean, are
Yeah.
you focused on checking boxes because a regulation says you have to, or are you genuinely building defenses that can actually stand up to today's attackers?
That question, yeah, cuts right to the heart of it. The digital landscape and, the threats within it, they're evolving at just an incredible pace.
Right? Hmm.
Simply adhering to those minimum requirements, well, it might not be enough. Not enough to protect your organization from sophisticated real-world attacks.
Exactly. And that rapid evolution, especially, with the rise of AI, it seems to be forcing a major shift in how we think about cybersecurity and specifically how we test our defenses.
Hmm.
That's really what we're diving into today. We've pulled together a stack of sources covering, well, everything from the latest cybersecurity regulations and standards guidance
To reports on actual breaches, the emerging threat landscape.
and insights into advanced testing frameworks, plus the impact of AI on, both sides of the fight.
Yeah, our goal here is to kind of distill the most important insights from all these documents. You've got regulatory texts like DORA and NYDFS, guidance from bodies like PCI SSC, and CREST,
Okay.
reports on incidents and AI threats from places like CCDCOE and OAuth, perspectives from testing frameworks like Tiber EU and CBIST, and analysis from industry players, Accenture, Bishop Fox.
Lots of ground to cover.
Definitely. We want to understand the forces driving this push for more rigorous, more realistic testing. We need to map out what the current threats, particularly these AI-driven ones, truly look like, and see how leading organizations and frameworks are trying to keep pace.
So let's jump right in. It really feels like there's a significant shift happening in regulation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It seems like it's moving beyond just having policies and procedures written down
Yeah.
and really pushing for proving your security works through, well, realistic testing.
There's absolutely a clear and growing emphasis on demonstrable security assurance. Regulators, standards, bodies, they're demanding evidence that controls are effective against likely threats, not just that they exist on paper.
Okay, so we see this pretty clearly with, say, New York's Department of Financial Services, right?
Yeah.
The 23 NYCRR 500 regulation.
That's a great example. It requires the financial entities it covers to conduct annual penetration testing. And crucially, this testing isn't just some rote exercise.
Wow.
No, it has to be based on the organization's specific risk assessment. Or, if they aren't doing that annual pen test, they need to have a continuous monitoring program that, provides similar assurance.
Right, okay. And the requirement isn't isolated, is it? Their security policies and procedures themselves, those also have to be informed by that risk assessment.
Exactly.
Plus, the regulation specifically calls out secure development practices and mandates testing for applications exposed externally. It's like it's looking at security assurance across the whole tech lifecycle.
Precisely. From build to operation. Then you have something like the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS. Now, it's not a government regulation, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's a global standard, absolutely critical for any entity handling payment card data. And their guidance on penetration testing, it provides a pretty clear methodology.
And PCI DSS is quite specific about what that testing should cover, isn't it? What needs to be in scope.
It is, yeah. It details the need to test external network components, internal networks, critical systems, and, really importantly, validate segmentation controls.
Segmentation.
Which means verifying that sensitive environments, like the ones holding cardholder data, are truly isolated from less secure parts of the network. This is a critical requirement aimed at stopping attackers moving laterally after, an initial breach.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And their guidance notes that while automated vulnerability scans are like a necessary baseline, they aren't sufficient on their own for a real pen test.
Right. The tester needs to go deeper, interpret the results, often manually validate findings to understand the actual real-world risk. They also really stress the importance of clear rules of engagement agreed upon before testing even starts.
Okay.
Exactly. And it's interesting, while social engineering isn't technically a mandatory part of a PCI DSS pen test, the standard acknowledges that entities can incorporate it, which shows an understanding that, yeah, the human element is also a valid target for attackers and maybe worth testing.
Okay, so moving across the Atlantic,
Yeah.
the European Union's Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA. This feels like maybe the most significant push for advanced testing, particularly in the financial sector.
I'd agree. DORA introduces a requirement for something called threat-led penetration testing, or TLPT, for certain financial entities. And this is a much more advanced form of testing than your traditional pen test.
Threat-led.
Yeah.
That sounds key. What does that actually mean in practice based on the guidance you've seen?
It means the test scenarios are based on realistic, sophisticated threats specifically relevant to the financial sector and, critically, the entity being tested.
Okay, so not generic.
No, not just looking for generic vulnerabilities. It's about simulating tactics used by actual threat actors. The framework that underpins this, Tiber EU, and the guidance from the European supervisory authorities, ESMA, EBA, EIOPA, they emphasize that TLPT involves a full red teaming exercise.
Red teaming.
Yeah, mimicking a sophisticated adversary trying to achieve specific objectives against the entity. It's a whole different level.
And the requirements for DORA TLPT sound quite stringent from the sources we looked at. Like, the duration seems pretty long.
Yes, exactly. To accurately simulate those stealthy, persistent threat actors, the active red teaming phase is required to last a minimum of 12 weeks.
12 weeks? Wow.
Yeah, it allows the testers time to conduct proper reconnaissance, establish footholds, and execute a multi-stage attack, which is far more representative of how advanced attackers operate than, say, a quick one-week test.
Okay, that makes sense. And you mentioned purple teaming. That's a mandatory component of DORA TLPT. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Purple teaming is a really crucial collaborative element. It involves the red team testers and the entity's own blue team, their defenders, actually working together.
How does that work?
Well, the red team performs the simulated attacks, and the blue team is actively observing, detecting, responding, often with, real-time feedback loops. The point isn't just finding vulnerabilities, it's fundamentally about improving the blue team's detection and response capabilities against the specific threat behaviors being simulated. It really maximizes the learning outcome.
So it's a complex exercise then, involving multiple parties. You've got a control team within the financial entity managing it.
Right.
Oversight from a designated TLPT authority, which could even be multiple regulators for cross-border tests.
Correct. And throughout all phases, there's a very high priority placed on robust risk management. Measures have to be put in place to ensure the test is controlled, it's safe, it doesn't disrupt critical functions.
While still being realistic.
Exactly. That's the balancing act. Confidentiality is also paramount during the test itself, with lessons learned shared more widely only after the test is formally concluded.
It sounds like the external testers and the threat intelligence providers involved are also heavily scrutinized.
Absolutely. They need specific certifications and demonstrated experience. The guidance explicitly mentions years of experience as an appropriate measure. In some frameworks like CBS, which DORA TLPT can leverage, they actually have to be accredited service providers.
Okay.
And critically, third-party service providers, the ones that support critical functions for the financial entity, they can and should be involved in the test scope. Their staff might even be included in the control team where it's relevant.
That acknowledges the whole interconnected ecosystem, right?
Precisely. It recognizes that risk doesn't stop at the entity's front door.
So bringing it back then, DORA TLPT, unlike maybe a traditional pen test focused on one system, is really designed to assess a targeted attack against the entire entity, people, processes, and technology. It's a true test of organizational resilience against sophisticated threats.
That systemic view is absolutely key. Now, stepping outside finance for a moment, what about healthcare? HIPO comes to mind.
Yeah, IPA. The security role mandates covered entities and their business associates conduct a risk analysis and implement risk management measures to protect electronic protected health information, EPHI. Now, penetration testing isn't an explicit line item requirement in the rule itself.
Oh, okay.
But it's widely regarded as a critical best practice for identifying vulnerabilities and managing risk, which is the core mandate of the rule.
And guidance like NIST Special Publication 800-66R2, that provides considerations for implementing the security rule, right? Including thoughts on how often evaluations or tests should happen based on changes.
Exactly. And given the significant civil penalties, we're talking up to potentially $50,000 per violation and even potential criminal penalties.
Wow.
Organizations in healthcare have a really strong incentive to proactively test their defenses, even if the specific method isn't spelled out.
Yeah.
The risk analysis requirement effectively pushes them towards testing as a way to demonstrate compliance.
Okay, so we're seeing a clear trend here across different sectors, different standards. towards requiring, or at least strongly recommending, more rigorous, risk-informed testing. But as you mentioned earlier, this push isn't happening in a vacuum.
No?
It's driven by the fact that the threats are not just keeping pace, but, well, rapidly evolving, especially with this game-changing impact of AI.
That's the critical link, isn't it? Regulations are responding to the reality of the threat landscape. We've all seen the headlines about real-world attacks with massive impact. The DarkSide ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline back in May 2021, that's mentioned in the CCDCOE source, and it's just a stark reminder.
Oh, yeah. That attack brought critical infrastructure to a standstill. It disrupted the fuel supply chain across the eastern U.S. It really demonstrated how cyber attacks can have tangible physical consequences, not just, data breaches.
And the attribution was complicated too, right?
Well, DarkSide later claimed they lost control of their infrastructure due to pressure, and U.S. officials clarified they weren't behind that specific disruption, but it just highlights the disruptive power these groups have and the complexities involved.
And now layered on top of these, let's call them traditional threats, we're facing AI-driven capabilities. Sources like Palo Alto Networks and OWASP are really sounding the alarm about AI agents and the risks they bring.
This is where things get really interesting and, frankly, concerning. It's not just about the AI models having vulnerabilities themselves,
Okay.
but systemic risks that arise from the model's inherent limitations, things like prompt injection, and how these AI agents are integrated with other tools and systems.
Prompt injection, intent breaking, goal manipulation, agent communication poisoning. These sound like, well, new concepts we need to get our heads around.
They are fundamentally about manipulating the AI's instructions or its goals to achieve malicious outcomes. As Bishop Fox noted in their analysis of LLM pen testing, if an AI system has access to tools, say tools that can make network requests or interact with the file system,
Right.
an attacker could potentially use prompt injection to trick the AI into executing remote code or stealing sensitive data, maybe by abusing API keys the AI has access to. It turns the AI agent itself into a potential attack vector.
And the UK government's reports on AI safety, they seem to underscore even broader, sort of longer-term concerns about the dual-use nature of AI.
Absolutely. They highlight the deep uncertainty surrounding powerful general-purpose AI. The potential outcomes, they say, range from incredible positive to existential risks.
Existential risk.
Like things like AI-enabled terrorism or even, down the line, potentially losing control over highly advanced systems.
Wow, that feels like quite a leap from prompt injection to existential risk.
It is, but the reports look across that whole spectrum. On a more immediate level, though, they detail how malicious actors can leverage AI right now to scale and enhance existing harmful practices.
For example.
Think AI-enhanced stalking, automatically inferring deeply personal attributes from huge data sets, or creating highly personalized and very effective phishing campaigns at a speed and scale humans just couldn't achieve, and probably at a lower cost, too.
And the reports also seem pretty cautious about our ability to fully mitigate these risks with the methods we have today.
That's a key takeaway, definitely. While technical methods exist to try and improve AI robustness, they face significant limitations. It's described as a constant cat-and-mouse game,
Right.
where developers fix vulnerabilities only after they're discovered. Proving the robustness of these complex AI models to unforeseen failure modes, well, that's still an open research problem. Mathematical proofs of robustness, not currently possible.
And this idea of humans reliably overseeing AI systems that might eventually exceed human capabilities, sometimes called scalable oversight, that's still very much in the early research stages.
Very preliminary, yes. So you have this picture. A rapidly evolving threat landscape, significantly influenced by AI, hitting us right at the same time that regulations are demanding more sophisticated, threat-informed testing. How do organizations possibly bridge this gap between the regulatory push and the sheer pace of threat evolution?
This seems to be where concepts like threat intelligence, continuous validation, and building true cyber resilience really come together.
Exactly. Threat intelligence is the foundation. You see it in frameworks like Tiber EU, CBS, and DORA TLPT. High-quality threat intelligence provides the evidence, the scenarios for the red team simulations.
So it makes the test relevant.
Precisely. It ensures the testing isn't generic, but specifically mimics adversary tactics targeting that organization's critical systems. It creates that essential golden thread connecting real-world threats to the testing methodology.
And the DORA guidance emphasizes that this intelligence isn't static, right? It includes analysis of current geopolitical trends, economic factors, technology shifts.
Yes, all things that could influence cyber threats. It's about having a dynamic, ongoing understanding of your potential adversary.
Okay, and this links directly to the concept of cyber resilience, which sources like the World Economic Forum and Accenture really highlight.
Yeah, resilience is becoming a core strategic imperative, not just, an IT function. It's about moving beyond the idea of 100% prevention, which, let's face it, is unattainable,
Right.
to focusing on the ability to absorb the impact of an incident, recover quickly, learn from what happened, and adapt your defenses accordingly.
So planning for significant incidents isn't being defeatist, it's just realistic risk management.
Exactly. Investing in resilience helps reduce the economic costs of breaches, data loss, IP theft, and protects reputation. Frameworks like NIST CSF, ISO 27001, ASSOC 2, they provide structures for managing this risk, and sharing lessons learned across the industry is incredibly valuable.
And building resilience today, it has to account for the expanded attack surface from all this new technology and also the dual-use nature of AI.
Right, recognizing the opportunities, but also planning for its potential misuse by attackers. As the WEF source pointed out, just gaining the necessary visibility and insight to manage the risks from emerging tech, like generative AI, is a major ongoing challenge.
That's where the validation methods come back in, isn't it? You need ways to continuously check if your defenses are actually working against these evolving threats.
Precisely. Regulations like NYDFS allowing for continuous monitoring, standards like PCI, and regulations like DORA requiring penetration testing or TLPT, these are mechanisms for validation. Testing helps you find known vulnerability types, like those listed in the OWASP Top 10.
Like cross-site scripting, sensitive data exposure.
Exactly. And it helps confirm that foundational controls like those PCI, DSS segmentation requirements we talked about are actually effective in practice.
And that mandatory purple teaming in DORA TLPT seems like a perfect example of validation aimed squarely at improving the defensive side.
It really is. By collaborating directly with the red team, the blue team gets real-time exposure to attack techniques. They learn how to detect and respond more effectively right there in their own environment. It's validating their capabilities against realistic simulations.
So it's kind of this continuous loop. Understand the real threats through intelligence, design tests that mimic those threats using frameworks like Tiber EU or CBS, validate your defenses through sophisticated exercises like TLPT or continuous monitoring, learn from the results, including via purple teaming.
And then use that knowledge to build genuine organizational resilience. It's a cycle.
This whole landscape feels incredibly dynamic, almost overwhelming, actually. So what does this all mean for you, our listener, trying to navigate this world?
Well, if you're involved in compliance or legal roles, the message seems pretty clear. Regulations are moving way beyond simple checklists. You need to understand the spirit behind requirements like TLPT or risk-based pen testing.
Go deeper.
Yeah, advocate for security assurance that goes deeper than just paper-based compliance. You need to grasp what realistic testing means in the context of these evolving threats, including AI.
Okay. And if you're a CISO or maybe another executive.
Then your strategic focus has got to be on cyber resilience. It's not just about preventing the first attack anymore, but ensuring your organization can withstand and recover from significant incidents. Your risk management needs to account for sophisticated adversaries, potentially leveraging AI.
So push for better validation.
Push for continuous validation. Push for threat intelligence-led approaches that test your actual capabilities against realistic threats, not just point-in-time audits that might miss the mark.
Makes sense. And if you're on the front lines, red teams, blue teams.
For them, the technical challenge is just escalating rapidly. AI agents introduce entirely new attack vectors you need to understand. Regulations like DORA TLPT are pushing for highly advanced simulations and that mandatory collaboration through purple teaming.
So continuous learning.
Mastering both offensive techniques and defensive strategies, and crucially, understanding how they connect to real threats and regulatory expectations, that's absolutely essential now.
Okay, one more group. What if you're actually building AI systems, particularly generative AI?
Well, then you're dealing with novel security risks, prompt injection, systemic vulnerabilities, things we've touched on. The guidance coming out from sources like OWASP on Gen AI security is critical. You need to proactively incorporate security thinking right into the development lifecycle itself, recognizing that traditional security methods might not be sufficient anymore.
Right. So to kind of wrap things up, Regulations are catching up to the reality of sophisticated threats. They're demanding more rigorous, threat-informed testing and a real focus on organizational resilience.
Definitely. But meanwhile, the threat landscape is being dramatically reshaped by AI, introducing new attack vectors and really accelerating that cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders.
So bridging this gap requires leveraging current and maybe even predictive threat intelligence to make validation truly relevant. It means focusing on continuous testing, collaborative defense techniques like purple teaming.
And fundamentally shifting towards a strategy of cyber resilience that accounts for the entire organization, people, process, tech, and acknowledges that breaches are, frankly, a possibility you have to plan for.
It's a relentless cycle, isn't it? Evolution for both offense and defense.
Constantly moving.
And that kind of leaves us with this final thought, maybe something for you to ponder. If regulators are only now standardizing these advanced frameworks for sophisticated threat-led testing against today's known adversaries, how far ahead might the next wave of AI-powered threats already be? And are we building defenses that can even begin to anticipate what's actually coming next?